Hi, Randy Sullivan here, Florida Baseball Armory. I want to take a second to tell you about this incredible tool called the training sock and how it evolved. So back in 2013, I was watching HBO Real Sports one night while I was writing a blog, and a story came on about Steve Delabar, and Tom House and his group had developed this technique called weighted ball holds. And I thought, well, what a cool way to get the most functional strengthening exercise I'd ever seen, because it was eccentric, it was at high speed, it matched the throwing motion as closely as anything I'd seen, and so I thought it was a really good exercise. Well, turns out I wasn't the only one that saw it, because the next day when I came to training at the old Armory, we had about 10 of our guys in there training. They were all doing weighted ball holds. No idea what we were doing. We were just hanging on to weighted balls. These guys started doing this for a week or two, and things were getting better. Some guys had some arm pain that went away. They were seeing bumps in velocity and things like that. But as I began to watch them do it, I noticed that when they held onto the ball, it kind of corrupted the movement. They were kind of choking off the end. And so one day they were warming up, and we had a few guys doing the holds, and so I stopped the group and I said, guys, I got to ask a question. Why do you guys dork it up at the end? Why does it look so weird at the end? And this one kid named Charlie said to me, well, coach, the ball's heavy. If I don't choke off the end of it, when I go to pretend like I throw it, it's going to fly across the room, break a wall, or hit somebody in the head. So I have to kind of choke it off at the end and stop the movement. And I thought, well, what if this corrupts our movement? We get a bunch of guys on the mound that move like that. And I thought, okay, I like the resistance, I like the exercise, but I don't like the fact that we have to hang on to it. So I said, guys, we have to figure out how to maintain the load, but let go of the ball. And they were like, coach, you cannot let go of the ball and keep the resistance. That's impossible. I said, well, if we don't figure this out, we're not going to be able to do this drill anymore. I'm worried that it's going to corrupt the way you throw. So the argument sort of reached a crescendo. In addition to having like 10 high school and college kids in there that night, I had my 11-year-old godson, Dalton, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, out of the mouths of babes, as they say, he looks up at me and he says, Uncle Randy, why don't you put it in a sock? And I was like, wow, that's a great idea. So I sent Pablo over to Sports Authority, RIP Sports Authority, to get a bunch of soccer socks. And we actually put the ball in the sock, and we'd hold the sock, and we were throwing the weighted balls in the sock, and it was better. We had the resistance, we had the full motion. The problem is the sock would come around and bang us in the back of the ribs. And so then it occurred to me, well, we only need these 3 fingers to throw. So I said, what if we take our hand and put it around the sock like this, and then we wrapped the sock around these 2 fingers, and we just use that as sort of a tether and wrap the rest around the wrist, and we threw the ball, and it would release, and we would leave about this much of the ball hanging off the sock, or sock hanging off with the ball here, and it worked out pretty good. Now, that was going really well, and then guys started coming to me with, like, you know, abrasions or cuts in their web space right here from where the sock was cutting them, and we're going through about a dozen socks a week because the balls wouldn't stay in the sock. And so I was working camps with Wes Johnson out in Texas, and working with Mr. Oates out there, and we said, you know, let's figure out a way to make this thing better. During the camps, Wes and I had some free time to stand out and talk to Mr. Oates, and we kind of came up with several prototypes. Mr. Oates would send them out to me. We'd rip them and say we need to reinforce it here and there. And now I'm going to bring in our strength and conditioning coordinator, Alan Kolb, and he's going to talk to you about how we actually integrate it into our strength program.
For such a long time, we haven't been able to throw enough to be good at throwing. So we've tried to find ways in the gym, or we've tried to find ways in different modalities of training to get better at throwing. But the throwing socks makes it really simple and easy. And we don't have to make things so siloed in our training. And that's the beauty of Savage training, is that we can do things and we can piece everything together and mold everything together. So with the throwing sock, what we have is we have a little bit of a loop inside the throwing sock, okay? And what we do is we put our pinky and our ring finger inside of there, and we'll use either a 5-ounce ball. Some guys like to use a true baseball, but a lot of times what we use is the 7-ounce tap weighted ball, and that just helps just with our decel a little bit more, okay? And the main thing is to make sure that the throwing sock is tight around right above your wrist, and it's going to be tight around. And then your 2 fingers are going to hold it just like a regular baseball. And when you throw it, you should hear a loud pop at the end, right like that. And the cool thing is you don't need much space in it. A lot of guys, especially for me, I was a reliever, so it was really cool for me. I could really easily warm up quickly in between innings. There's not as much stress on the arm when you do it, and you can throw really complete and easy. So in the gym, when you lift and you do all of these different exercises, you change the coordination of the muscle. So what the throwing sock does is that just helps coordinate the muscle back. So what we'll do is we can do simple lifts inside the gym, and then guys will do 15, 20 throws inside the sock, and we won't find any stress on the shoulder or elbow post lift.
You see, what happens is when we throw a baseball, typically the muscles on the back side of the shoulder, they surrender like a guy losing a tug of war. That leaves the biceps alone to resist 3 motions: long axis distraction, humeral head elevation, and terminal elbow extension. Well, when the ball hits the sock, the resistance there makes sure that the muscles on the posterior side stay active throughout the entire motion. Where it's the most vulnerable, it forces us into this internal rotation pronation maneuver. When the biceps is left alone, it rages eccentrically. If you're linear with your deceleration pattern, it rages eccentrically. And the problem is when you trace the biceps up, the short head goes over here to the coracoid process. The long head goes right up here, turns into the thin biceps tendon, and inserts on the superior labrum. And oftentimes it's that eccentric biceps that pulls the labrum off of the socket. But it also can create a problem in the forearm. The Tommy John ligament, the UCL, resists this movement called valgus. And these muscles right here that flex the fingers, flex the wrist, and pronate the forearm, they insert in a common tendon right on top of the UCL. When I touch where your UCL would be, I'm not actually touching the UCL, I'm touching the tendon of these four muscles. When you throw the baseball, when you activate those muscles, they impart the opposite force and put a varus force on it and put the UCL on slack and resist it. So I call them the first responders because they're right on the scene and they support the UCL. So those muscles actually pronate the forearm and flex the fingers, okay? So we have this concept in neurology called reciprocal inhibition where if I move one set of muscles, I have to turn the opposite ones off. For example, if I bend my elbow, I have to turn the triceps off. And so the same thing happens here. These muscles are pronators that protect the UCL. Well, the biceps is the most powerful supinator of the forearm. There's a muscle in here called the supinator, which isn't a very great supinator. It's the biceps that supinates the forearm. And when the biceps is raging eccentrically, it can impart a supination moment that reciprocally inhibits these first responders that reflexively turn off, and now there's no support for the UCL, and we get the big bang out here. So I think we see as many UCL injuries out here on the end as we do back here in layback. It actually, this motion where the ball hits the socket and it turns us into internal rotation and forearm pronation, actually turns the biceps off. When we're linear, it doesn't turn off. When we internally rotate and pronate like this, the biceps is inhibited and it turns off. And now I can protect the labrum and the UCL. So it's been really helpful in managing guys with arm pain. We use it a lot of different ways. We use it in our warm-ups oftentimes. It's a great way to warm up, especially if you have confined spaces in perfect game tournaments where you're in between places. We have some pro guys that warm up in the sock completely and then go to the mound. We use it in our rehab. We have guys that can't throw a baseball without pain, but it doesn't hurt to throw in the sock because the biceps is supported and the UCL and the labrum are also protected. And so we have them throw in the sock, and it allows us to work on the lower half inefficiencies, which are actually the primary contributors. And we use it in inclement weather when we can't get outside, it's snowing or raining, or we live in a cold weather area. We can do a lot of our work, and it was fantastic during COVID. We could use it when we were confined and throw in the sock and get the same kind of training. We have guys go to perfect game tournaments that are raining all week, and they throw a bullpen in the sock in the hallway. And then we use it for recovery the day after you throw. We get the full motion. We get to add the mechanical stimulus that organizes the newly forming tissue after you throw, the day after. And it gives them a mechanical stimulus to teach them how to line up in the proper formation so that we get organized quickly and we recover faster and we can get back to our training quicker. So it's been a fantastic tool. Get yourself a training sock at oatspecialties.com. Valuable tool I think every pitcher should have.